Thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you to all the panelists who have spoken so inspiringly. And thank you to the hundreds of people who have joined tonight. Actually, just having this meeting itself is so, so key. I find myself this week being accused of being divisive. I don't know whether to be flattered or alarmed that in the Telegraph, I'm singled out as a threat to multiracial Britain. And if I share with you what my naughty activity was, it was actually because it happened to go down the Saturday before to that fantastic, huge pro-Palestinian demonstration. And I'll give you the headline that they gave for that. It's saying, according to Nick Timothy, former advisor to Theresa May, we're not drifting into segregation, we're hurtling perilously towards it, because there's a growing mood of sectarianism threatening to undo the many successes of multiracial Britain. And I think we need to fix that, because what's happening is there's a growing solidarity movement in Britain. It's not, it's the opposite of divisiveness. It's about people coming together in the name of humanity, in the name of solidarity. And we're here to say we need to stop the impunity of Israel. No one here has been asking for special treatment for Palestinians or for Israelis to have bad treatment. What we are demanding is to have fair treatment and to stop having special treatment in terms of indulging the Israeli regime, which couldn't do what it did without our government's direct involvement, with its political cover, with the arms that are going to it. And of course, the United States is absolutely key. And we've got, and tonight's discussion clearly had Biden as a focus. And it's very interesting that whilst Biden's demeanor clearly is very, very different from Trump, what we actually saw in this latest round of aggression, which any human being around the world could see, is absolutely horrific and should have ended immediately. There was a delay. The ceasefire was not demanded by the American regime until actually the Israelis actually felt that maybe they hadn't got the political and strategic aims they had aimed for. That could have come in from day one. So the fact that Biden stayed quiet until we saw the huge uprisings, and again, I'm accused of being divisive because I use the word intifada. Intifada means uprising. Peaceful uprising. And I'm proud to say that we here are part of that peaceful intifada, that peaceful uprising. The Palestinians are leading the way, but it's an uprising which is global and international. It's a point that is almost, whilst inspiring, it's sad, but I like to look on the optimistic side. A few years ago, I would have considered myself as an activist, as somebody who was acting in solidarity with people who had less voice and less power, because we come from a place of privilege, and that we were somehow extending our benign solidarity. Today, I actually feel humbled by the courage, the determination, the samud, that's what the Arabic word for resilience, steadfastness, and the leadership the Palestinians are giving us and giving us heart in their uprising, because we here in the West are now facing our own censorship and silencing. Growing up, I couldn't even get my head around how a blatant occupation could be sold as anything but that. How being pro-Palestinian was even a question, you know, when the injustice was so obvious. How awful a regime must be that it silenced its own people to ask for justice. And yet we are finding here in the so-called mother of democracy that those same curtailing of freedom, the same curtailing of political freedoms to meet, to challenge things that we've taken for granted, I've taken for granted growing up in this country, that line has come right here. So we're in a twin struggle right now. We're in a struggle to extend our solidarity as we've done for many decades, but actually, we're actually fighting for our own political rights and our own political freedoms. And it's the Palestinians who I think are giving us courage and inspiration by showing that no matter what they have faced, you know, we're facing political censorship and maybe a threat to people's jobs because they're getting accused of being anti-Semitic, because a deliberate conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism has been allowed to go unchallenged, I would say, you know, and I think the left made a mistake by not challenging that more openly and really bringing to light what was going on. And so we're in that fight now for freedom of speech. The left have been very much beaten down and put on the defensive because of an acceptance of a certain frame. And this was always about imperialism. This was always about control. It's about controlling the land, it's about controlling the arms, and it's about controlling the language. And to coin a phrase, we need to take back control. We need to gain our confidence. We need to be able to assert unapologetically that we are on the side of humanity. And our ask is not actually complicated. One of the great injustices on this whole issue is how it's presented as, oh gosh, it's so complicated. It's about, you know, two people competing over the same land, and perhaps it's one of those things that can never ever be solved. Well, actually, the solution has been agreed. We don't need any more negotiations. It may come as a surprise to some people on this call even, that the Palestinians actually gave up so many of their rights for the sake of peace. They agreed to give up 78% of their land. They agreed to only have 22% of what had been their historic homeland for the sake of peace. They gave up half of Jerusalem, accepting only East Jerusalem. And so all they've asked for is 22% of the land, a right to return, not even to the direct places that people had been violently kicked out from, but at least to be able to come back to that 22%. So many people still denied that. But until now, Israel has not abided by those agreements. They're there. The international agreements are there. The United Nations upholds the Palestinians' rights. And what's happened is it's not that the Palestinians are not upholding their end of the bargain. It's that they haven't been given a state. They are still subjected to illegal occupation. These settlements are not recognised by international law. And in fact, any country which is supporting such illegal settlements is itself in breach of international law. So we find ourselves as the UK and the United States actually breaching the very law that we claim to be upholders of. So the solution here is very simple. This could not be happening without the support, explicit support of other countries. And as soon as that is withdrawn, this issue can be solved. Because what the Israelis are doing in one way, you know, if we take a step back, is very rational. Why on earth would they not keep taking more and more? Why on earth would they abide by international agreements, which they find uncomfortable, if no matter what they do, they are still given money, they are still given arms, and the Palestinians are allowed to suffer the way they have been? Because that's the situation we're finding ourselves in, which is why our solidarity movement is so important. The international solidarity movement, just as in the case of South African apartheid, but I would argue actually even more so, the situation in that tiny strip of land, which has caused so much misery for so many decades and has implications for peace and war around the world. Actually, as I say, the solutions are there. They just need to be implemented. The International Criminal Court to be applied to Israel and any Palestinians. The Palestinians have agreed to it, including Hamas, which cuts out any of those issues around war crimes. The land dispute, as it's still called, has been settled. The Palestinians compromised, but they still have not been given recognition for even what they had been prepared to give up and the bits that they had been prepared to accept. So there will be no movement until the international community itself stops siding with the aggressor. There is no impartiality here. That's the crux of the problem. And in fact, the aggressor, the occupier, is being rewarded. Even in this latest round of violence, and the Americans gave hundreds of millions of pounds of extra aid. There were one or two instances over the last few decades, in the 1980s and 1970s, when the American regime simply said, we're not going to give the next round of funding. And Israel very, very quickly complied with what it was supposed to do in those instances. So I'm not here even arguing that the Israeli population is going to somehow sort this out. We know that the right-wing trend has been growing and growing. And as I say, when the political situation on the ground is such that they have everything to gain by continuing this belligerent, unfair, inhumane attitude, I'm not looking for that solution. Of course, we always salute any efforts around humanity, around justice, any solidarity between the Palestinians and Israelis, and there are pockets of that. But from my perspective, this situation arose because of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, before the Second World War, before the the absolutely genocidal Holocaust, there was land appropriation going on, settlement and takeover of Palestinian land. So this whole twinning of the Holocaust narrative and denial of what happened between 1917 and when the British mandate took over and when the British mandate ended, that has not been recognised. That how that dispossession started then. In 1947, the Israelis actually totally breached what even the United Nations had given them. The United Nations gave an unfair settlement. They gave 55% of Palestine's historic homeland to a minority population, which wouldn't be fair by any standard of justice. But even that was breached, such that in 1967, they took over 78% of the land. And at that point, even then, for the sake of peace, the Palestinians were willing to compromise. So when people say to you, you find the Palestinians gave up, that is not what this is about. What this is about is Palestinians who've already been expelled violently, being denied the right to return. It's about creating such terrible conditions that the Palestinians who remain feel that it's better for them to leave. And this is why I pay tribute, not just for the peaceful intifada, but the samud, the resilience and the determination and the lack of giving up. Because I can tell you, I mean, I'll be honest, there are times when I feel like giving up, and even with all the luxuries that we have in our country, when you face all the kind of attacks and the malign, you know, when your character's attacked, when your job's on the line, you know, it's easy for us to feel down and disheartened. But when you see that total consistency and that dignity, and that we would rather carry on in this struggle rather than give up our rights, because we know that right is on our side. And I believe, just like slavery, just like the colonial occupations of the past, that one day this injustice will be redressed. One day we will look back on this apartheid regime the way that the South African regime is looked back on. But in the meantime, the struggle is on. And we're at a point, actually, that we are stronger than we have been for decades. We went from just a few months ago, one moment, somebody at the door. This is what it's like with the Zoom meeting.
I'm gonna have to wrap you up anyway, Salma, so just...
Hold on. June the 12th, make sure you're there. Actually, now the people who had us on the back foot are on the back foot because the mask has come off. It's obvious what is happening. Let's take heart. Let's be confident. See you on June the 12th.